currently posted at 1.5 million less than this year's budget. But I think you're right, Peter, in terms of making sure that people understand what the levers are, what will initiate the trigger of a lever to, okay, at what point would we consider tapping this? At what point would we consider tapping this? Whether we have to make those cuts now, I think that I would be nervous about it. Again, going back to the point that the vast majority of school budget, the town budget, it's people. And it's the services that the town is asked to provide. So it gets really hard to cut it much more. I also understand your point about, is there stuff that we can look at purchasing this year so that we don't necessarily have to rely on that next year. But I'm not sure that I would back that out of the budget yet. Only because I might spend it this year and hope that if I did have to cut it, I could cut it next year. But I think I would still leave it available in the operating budget if it then wasn't something that had to be cut. Again, not knowing what the fall is going to look like. So, yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Can I make just one more comment here, which is, you know, I've been following, not really participating, but following some social media discussions about the budget and taxes and what individuals in town are going through. And, you know, I mean, fortunately, you know, the Paycheck Protection Program, I think has helped a lot of people along the way. But there is still a lot of pain out there being suffered at an individual and family level throughout the world. But here it's affecting us here in Lunenburg. And, you know, Selectman Luck brought up the possibility of not levying to the limit in the coming year is a means of acknowledging the financial stress that a lot of individuals and families are going through. I personally don't agree with that position because I think that to do so would neglect our responsibility to deliver needed services to the citizens of Lunenburg and to meet our obligations as stewards of the town. So I don't agree with that position. However, I do think that it's a worthwhile discussion at some point, and it may not be in Finance Committee, and it may not necessarily need to occur in the next couple of weeks, but maybe it does, is to look at, okay, if we have this $900,000 gap, and if we don't spend it, or you know, if things get conceivably worse, or we run into a really serious economic condition where we've got super high unemployment, what can we do to ease the tax burden on the property taxpayers in Lunenburg? And what would some of these deltas translate to in property tax relief? Again, I'm not even sure that they would be substantial enough to be worth considering. But I bring up the topic because I feel like it ought to at least be raised. And a discussion is probably warranted if we even know what the conclusion of that discussion might come to.
Right, and I'm not sure, I also can't speak to, and maybe Heather or Karen can, but when there is a situation like this and you do have a taxpayer who is having a tough time with the increase, to what extent does the town work with the taxpayer to help them? And maybe you need to speak to that just a little bit in terms of what assistance does the town offer to individuals who might be coming into a problem? Or is there something that we should be talking about in how to do that? I'm sorry, Heather.
So we have the senior work off program. There's that for seniors. There's exemptions for veterans and seniors. And the treasurer collector does work out payment plans for people as well. And Karen, you can go further into that if you want.
Karen, do you have more to? Okay.
No, I honestly don't have more to add, but I do know that Mylene has entered into several payment plans with residents who are having difficulty paying. I mean, we could get her involved in one of these meetings and she could discuss the procedures that are taken and how much they are required to pay. But I know that there are several in place right now for people who have difficulty meeting the payments.
Yeah, it would be interesting because what's very difficult is not knowing who's affected, how they're affected, just because, you know, like of privacy issues and things like that. It's hard to say what number of people are affected to what extent, and what avenues might the town want to investigate to try to help people who might be in that situation that maybe is something that's funded going forward. I know that part of the CPA was, you know, like, yes, that will help pay for people, you know, who have problems, but I don't know to what extent. So I don't know if maybe there is an avenue to investigate that might help individuals who are having issues with, you know, because of current financial pain. But then there are some people who are not having pain, and, you know, so yeah, that's a tough one, but that would be an interesting discussion to have going forward. You're right.
Sorry, Dave
Whether
has
or
had his
not-
hand raised, and John does as well.
John, yeah.
Dave and
Okay.
John.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, where we've gone into a discussion about relief for taxpayers, it kind of ties right into a question that I have as a follow-up to my public comment at the Board of Selectmen's meeting Tuesday evening. I chose not to debate it then because it was a public comment and didn't feel it was appropriate at that time to ask this question. But I would like to ask this question and see if we can get an answer from either Heather or Karen. I'd like to know the rationale for recommending not postponing the tax due date along with the fees and interest on the tax bill to the end of that date, which I believe was July 1st. I had the dates wrong Tuesday night, but
No, we had the ability to extend the due date on taxes to June 1st, and we had the ability to waive interest and fees on payments until June. Well, they wouldn't realize penalties on any of their bills until June 29th. At least in my opinion, the option that we chose is better for the taxpayers in Lunenburg because it extends the amount of time that they have to pay without penalty. And Heather, you can comment on that as well.
Right. It was purely a matter of semantics in a way, because we were only able to extend the deadline for tax payments, no other, no other motor vehicle or anything like that. But people who pay after June 1st won't receive any penalties or interest until June 30th. So up until June 29th, even though it states it's June 1st.
Did that answer your question, Dave?
I'll still have to wrap my head around that because I think there's some advantage to the due date being moved now, unless you're telling me it cannot be moved to the 29th, which is
No.
the same date. It can't under that bill.
No.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
John?
And just in general, I want to say that it would help me understand the situation more if I knew what kind of mechanisms the town has to lessen the effect on taxpayers who are stressed, who are in economic hardship right now. Just as a way of understanding what they're dealing with, and yeah, so that's it.
Okay.
If I could make one quick comment in regards to that, John, I think one big thing that now with schools being closed through the end of the school year, some parents who were counting on the schools reopening, although I've known for a while that they weren't going to reopen, but now they're dealing with the fact that many of them are going to have to stay out of work to take care of their kids. So their lack of income has been extended through the end of the school year. You know, I'm sure in the past years they've had to make arrangements beyond the end of the school year because they work and they had to have childcare. Both of those don't exist right at the moment.
But that also gets to another issue, which is the longer this thing goes on, the more the consequences are going to be felt. So we're going to have to figure out how much. This goes back to the conversation we had just a few minutes ago about 900,000, because it really comes down to the taxpayer in my mind. What we do to alleviate long-term stress for taxpayers.
Right. I think where it gets difficult in terms of as a budget question is there a way to make, because I don't see it as don't do the 2.5% increase. I think you do that because you don't know who's, you know, if it was 100% of the town, that would be one thing. But if it's targeted, if there was a way to set up some kind of interest-free program for people to defer tax payments, that would be something in my mind that would be interesting to look into being able to do. But I don't know that would be us that would do that. That would
My
be
understanding is a lot of that is limited by state law in terms of what we do for individuals. But as it turns out, we have an opportunity to talk to a couple of legislators on Tuesday, so maybe we can bring that up.
But that's true. We do.
Oh.
All right. If there's nothing more on this, then, oh, I'm sorry, Michelle.
Just wanted to mention, and Heather and Karen certainly say something if I'm not being accurate, but one of the problems with not taxing to the levy is you will never be able to make up for the loss, if I understand it correctly. If you
No, actually, you could have a bigger than 2.5% increase to make up to the levy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Which would
That would be
also
something
go over
different.
really, really big. You
Oh,
know, yeah,
okay.
that would go over really, really big in town to have a 4% increase in the levy limit.
No, I didn't realize
So-
you could do that. I didn't think you could do that.
But you can, just to be clear though, let's say we were to levy to 1.5% this year and leave 1 percentage point off the table. And then the following year, levy to 3.5% or whatever the mathematical number is that you come to. You're still losing that 1 year of that delta, that 1% that you didn't tax. You can't go back and recoup the money you didn't collect. You just add that on top of that you're just adding the percentage, not the actual lost revenue.
Right. I see what you're saying. Yep. Although, all right, wait a minute. No, because the levy limit.
Let's say we didn't raise taxes for 10 years. In 10 years from now, we could raise taxes 25% or whatever the compounded rate is of them. But we couldn't.
But I think the limit.
We couldn't go back and say, and we're also going to tax you for all the money that we didn't collect over the last 10 years. We can't do that.
Right.
Is there a limit on the number of years that you can carry excess capacity?
No.
No,
Levy
it
capacity?
just keeps adding on. So the levy limit will move even though the levy capacity doesn't hit it.
Right.
So the levy limit will continue to grow even if you don't tax up to it. So, but you still lost the benefit of that one, you know, like the 1% that year in terms of state, in terms of town services. But, that's my understanding anyway.
Yeah.
This is
Bottom line in my mind is that, you know, anything we don't, using a different word, encumber in the budget at annual town meeting and move into reserves is up for appropriation in the fall town meeting to be plugged in where maybe we took it out of or where we need it more. I feel that we basically encumber it if we put it into the budget now, and there's more resistance to pulling it back than to inserting it.
That's probably true. I think I would agree that if we pull everything out of the budget and put it into reserves, then yes, we would have to have people vote to pull it out.
And
It wouldn't just
Michelle had
come
her
out.
hand
I'm sorry,
raised,
Michelle. Yeah.
apparently.
You know, I guess I'm really confused. I thought the Prop 2.5 said that you can raise taxes no more than 2.5% of the previous year's levy. So if that's the case, then how can we do a 3.5% increase to the tax levy if you can only do 2.5% from the previous year?
Because that's not exactly what it says, Michelle.
And that's what I'm asking for clarification.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, Karen or Heather, which one wants to speak to that?
Either one of us can. So what happens on an annual basis is we take the prior year levy and we add the 2.5% to. So if this year we chose to only raise 1% of that 2.5%, then Department of Revenue doesn't care. They calculate our levy limit at the 2.5%. So if we could raise $1 million and we only raised 800,000, the next year we can raise that 200,000 that we didn't raise, plus whatever our 2.5% is based on the prior year levy. If that makes any sense to you.
No, it does. I'm really surprised by it because I hadn't read any of that. So I mean, it's great that that's the case because certainly then it's worth looking at. But I was under a different impression. So all right, as long as that's the case, I mean, clearly you guys know.
And that's why
That's
every
okay.
year as part of the recap certification, the Board of Selectmen are required to sign a page where they're acknowledging that we either do or don't have excess levy capacity.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so just to clarify my own understanding then, because what you said just made me think that I have this all wrong. So we can add the 200,000 that we didn't, and then it just goes back to last year's levy or last year's levy limit.
No, when they calculate what you always look back at what you could have raised versus what you actually raised. So when you go to the next year, you're looking at what your prior year limit could have been, even if you didn't levy to that capacity.
Okay, thank you. Anything more on that? Okay, so then we can then move on to the slides. Oh, so I have to give this back to Peter has it.
Yeah, I got it. I'm just, sorry. You guys see that?
Yep.
All right.
We'll go to the second one. The administration and unclassified will be next week. So this is our current debt schedule, the amounts that are reflected in the budget.
Oops, sorry.
Okay. And so this includes the estimated debt payments for the ladder truck and the Celebra property. And if we look at our current debt schedule and how it aligns with our debt policy, that limits our non-exempt borrowing to 4% of our tax levy, and exempt and non-exempt borrowing combined to no more than 14% of our tax levy. We're currently below that limit in our financial policy. At the end of fiscal 23, we have approximately 1,010,000 of excludable debt dropping off for the primary school and public safety complex. But this is partially offset by the end of the MSBA reimbursement money that we received for about $535,000 that you'll see under the yellow line. So you'll see in fiscal 24, that number dropped down to 59,000. So that drop off of excludable debt is also offset by that reimbursement money. So in this schedule does not include the final loan amounts of $1,700,000 $730,000 for the remainder of the middle school, high school project, and the final amount for the pavement management plan. We had our, as Karen referenced earlier, we had our meeting with Standard & Poor's yesterday, the bond rating company. It's part of before you go out to bond, they meet over the phone conference, and there's a series of about 2 pages of questions that they go through and ask you to help ascertain your bond rating. So it went pretty well yesterday, I think. Karen agreed. And so we should see no change in our bond rating, which is second to highest rating. Any questions?
Dave has his hand raised, and I have a question as well.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Peter.
my question is about the closeout for the middle high school. Is there a particular reason that this is going so incredibly slow?
It was incredibly slow. MSBA, they did not complete their audit, and they had their final meeting in April. So we were waiting for that this whole time, for them to complete the audit. So that tells us our final percentage that is town funded versus MSBA funded.
Okay, so those numbers are on the way now, or we're still waiting?
Those were finalized. They were last week was their meeting, right, Karen? On April 14th, I think, 15th. And so.
Yeah, they met on April 15th, and we're expecting a final pay. Typically, after the board meets, we receive final payment within 10 to 14 days, I'm told. So we're expecting a final payment of about $1.2 million, and the $600,000 that Heather spoke about is the final portion that the town was it's the final local portion that we're required to bond. So
Okay.
the project is finally complete.
Okay, thank you.
And suffice to say, these numbers reflect the payment of the bonds, not bands or anything else that we've had. This all reflects real debt service that we're going to be paying for the foreseeable future.
This schedule does not have the bond issuance for these ones that we haven't gone out to bond yet for the middle school and pavement management project, but it does for the rest. We have estimated payment for the Saliba property and the ladder truck in there, and the rest of our bond service. It also covers sewer debt. It's in there as well.
So these numbers, like net excludable debt across the bottom of the spreadsheet for FY 22, 23, 24 are not accurate numbers when we finally land that bond or those bonds, correct?
Correct. That will change once we
Okay.
get the bond amount.
In your estimation, are they going up or down?
Up.
Up. So to what extent, do you know?
I do not know. Do you?
No.
Do you know that? You don't have-
I don't know that yet at this point either.
We don't have anything substantial to offset that until about 2024, is that correct?
Right.
Correct.
Actually,
Yep.
Yeah. Again, this is something that we kind of deferred from our last in-person meeting. I think that this is something that we need to have as part of a more holistic discussion around debts that are on the horizon, that we can potentially run some scenarios around, just so that people are clear-eyed in terms of what effect this is going to have on taxes in particular.
Mm-hmm. That bond will be issued in May, so we will know final amounts by that time frame, right, Karen?
Correct. And that total.
So Heather,
that-
will that hit, will those numbers hit or be added to 2021, or will it come onto these numbers in 2022?
Those payments, Karen, would that be first?
There'll be principal and interest payments added to 2021.
Okay.
But I mean, that's the final bond that we need to issue for both the middle school, high school project and the pavement management plan. And it's the smallest of any that we've issued. The total bond issue is $1.7 million, and the borrowing is 15 years. So the impact to the average tax bill compared to the other borrowings, not so much for the pavement management, but for the school project, will be minimal.
And we've
In
been
other,
paying
in other words, we've been hit by most of that increase already.
already. Okay,
Correct.
that's helpful. That's
Yeah.
helpful. Okay.
Yeah.
And we've had to make principal and interest payments on some of that in the last year, right?
Right. I mean, we've issued bonds going back. I think the first bond we issued may have been in 2017. So we've made, or maybe even 16. I can't even remember. It's been a long time coming. But we've made at least a couple of years worth of principal and interest payments on the high point of those bond issues. So I actually think that our levy has peaked because of those projects already, and now will go down slightly every year.
Hopefully. Because there won't be any new projects.
I wouldn't think we'll have any new debt exclusions for a while.
Well, that speaks to alternative funding for things that in the past have been
Good point.
Borrowed for.
Right.
That's a good point.
Okay.
All right, next slide
Um,
is the capital plan.
I keep trying to move it like I can.
Hard for you. So this is the revised capital plan as voted by the Capital Planning Committee. And this reflects only the use of free cash. So originally it had money in there from tax revenues with a number of other projects that were deferred. And you'll notice the second police cruiser was positioned below number 11, so it's no longer on this request for annual town meeting. And there was another project between 10 and 11 because of the cost that was below 11 as well, moved down.
Okay, any questions or comments on the capital plan?
I think if we wanted to be more aggressive, there's a couple of those things that we could also drop out, but I don't see a need to do that now. But if we see by town meeting that things have gone really bad, I think there's another couple 100,000 we could pull out of that also.
Okay.
How
Then,
much, the Turkey Hill asbestos abatement,
Mm-hmm.
how many more years do they have on that?
It's the last phase of that project.
So this will be the last payment, last phase.
Yeah, but we all need to be aware that that does not clean the building completely. That's the last phase of the program that
Of
they
the
put in
original,
place.
the original project.
Right.
So if we, for example, were to go and do a major overhaul of that building, there might be some additional asbestos abatement that would need to occur to be able to do that project.
It definitely is.
Right.
Mr. Launder has already stated that.
Yep.
okay.
That's all I had for tonight.
Okay. Then then moving on to the next item would be, do you have any updates for us?
None,
None we want to hear, probably.
none of the ones we went over.
Okay, then with that, do we have any committee reports? We have no committee reports, so then do we have any public comment from anybody on the committee?
And he asked, what is the status of sale of the West Street property?
Those bids were received today. So we have to evaluate the bid proposals.
How many bids were received?
3.
Is there a minimum purchase price on that?
There was no minimum stated in the bid.
All right,
Thank you.
Dave?
Terry, I've given you back host privileges, and Dave had his hand up.
Yeah, I see Dave's hand, and then I was actually going to ask you to keep it in case anybody had any, once we open public comment, if anybody needed to go back to a sheet, but that's okay, I'll do it.
All right.
I think I can find them maybe. It just won't be as smooth as yours. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I'd just like to take this opportunity. Most of my public comments are going after a specific answer to a question or disagreeing with something that's been done. I just would like to go on the record to Heather, Karen, and the entire staff on the town side. I do realize you guys are really working hard every single day of the week to get us all through this. And as many of us have said before, part of our questioning numbers, dollars, think it should be more, think it should be less, is more a function of trying to get us all on the same page and work through our thought process. And I, again, thank you for all your work, especially Heather. Took on the responsibility of getting set up with Senator Tran and Representative Hay. I wanted to take that to get some pressure off of Heather, but I also, in our private discussion, said I thought it was much more appropriate that she generate the invitation rather than myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Heather, thank you. You're definitely keeping us in information, so definitely appreciate it, and definitely very responsive to any of the questions and suggestions that we do bring up, so that's helpful too. Phyllis and Carl Luck have a hand raised, so I'm going to now go to public comment from the public, and I'll recognize Phyllis or Carl. I'm not sure whose hand is up. So if you could just identify yourself and your address and go ahead.
Carl Luck, 50 Sunset Lane. It's been a great discussion. I really appreciate it. I have a couple of questions, and I didn't know what, during the presentation, I collected some. I didn't, and so it's not just public comment. First question was fairly simple. Heather mentioned, and I really happy to hear that she contacted a lot of people, but conquered among one. And there was a comment about a 10%, and I didn't know what the 10% was of what. Could you explain that a little bit, please?
10% of state aid, 10% reduction of state aid number.
Okay, so a reduction of 10% is what Concord's using?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. I'd say the best thing about this is I really appreciate the out-of-box thinking here. The comments that have been made and the suggestions are not just about cuts. We keep talking cuts, but there's been some really good discussion about things that are not cuts. I do agree with two of the members that we should try to find a little bit more cushion. But again, it doesn't have to be cuts. It can be other creative ways. And one of the ones that came up, which I think is worth exploring, across the town, is encumbering funds. If we have some additional, if we have some money that's going to fall to free cash that we can identify It's not that tough to encumber funds. My understanding, Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, if we have a contract that we could release for 2021 and we have funding to cover that contract, I believe we can encumber the funds for that and spend them next year. Is that correct?
No. Funds are encumbered for work that's done in that current fiscal year.
Well, then somebody, I talked to Sewer because we carried funds from last year to this year for one of our programs. We issued a contract at the end of last year, encumbered, I think, $40,000 worth of funds. Maybe I'm getting us all in trouble, but
I've heard that too, that DPW encumbers funds at the end of the year. Now, my understanding was that it was on projects that were not complete, that were started in that fiscal year, but carried over into the next fiscal year. Is that
Right.
a better description?
that's the subtlety.
That's a better description.
Yeah.
Okay, that must be what we did then.
Yeah, if the contract is entered into prior to the close of the fiscal year, the funds can be encumbered.
Okay, so for example, this is an example to test it. If we encumbered a little familiar with the stormwater funding, if the next year, I think we have 30-ish, 35,000 after the cuts that Heather made, which is great for next year's contract. And it doesn't need to go out to bid. It's already, the supplier is already selected. If we could find $35,000 in this year's budget, could we not put that contract in place?
Are they gonna start the work this year?
Sure.
Because if they start the work this year, then I would say the answer to that question is yes, but
Okay. Yeah.
I
Some of the
want to
work
verify that
was
with my boss.
It's a
Yeah,
complicated question because that contract has multiple tasks in that contract to do throughout the year that are due at different points of the year. So that's a complicated question.
Yeah, it was just an example. So there are ways under certain criteria that we can encumber some funds. So that's one way of getting creative without cuts and getting some of that work funded out of this year. And maybe there won't be any money this year in some mute point. I guess the other thing I want to just highlight, the 900,000 sure looks good, but the 900,000 is basically 10% of the state aid. So if the state aid did get cut by 10%, which none of us hope is going to happen and probably won't, but that would instantly eat the 900,000 that's now on the bottom line. If local receipts got cut by another 10%, that's another $300,000 that that's not accounted for. So I think trying to find some additional creativity is very good. And my last thing, because it's to quantify it, that $900,000 is essentially 2% of our budget. So we're basically playing with 2% of margin here, which is not a huge number, relatively speaking. Finally, just a timing question, maybe for Karen or whatever, because we talked about local receipts. Certainly, restaurants are a perfect example. They're going to take a hit and they're not coming back strong too quick. What is the timing between the customer paying sales tax, the meals tax, and the town? When do they come into the town? So to get an idea of what that lag is. So
we receive payments from the state on a quarterly basis, and I believe that the last payment that we received, the quarters are a little bit different. So I think it would have been for the period ending in February. So we haven't received, obviously, March, April, and May. And that would be the final quarter that we would receive before the close of FY20. I mean, I can tell you from a local receipt perspective for FY20 that we are just about at our estimate without even receiving the final quarter in FY20. So, as far as local receipts go for FY20, I anticipate that will exceed our estimate, and that those dollars will flow towards free cash at the close of this fiscal year.
And thank goodness for that.
Yep. Well, that's because we're always conservative with our local
Amen.
receipts.
Amen. And you guys should be exuberantly applauded for your work there.
Yep, I would fight that hand in tooth, or whatever the phrase is. I would say always keep those receipts conservative. And Heather says the same thing, because they're elastic revenues that are driven by the economy, and you have no idea what's going to happen from year to year.
Right, and I still haven't heard anything on whether or not the restaurants will be able to reopen indoors next month or not.
Probably not.
Yeah, I guess but the thing that everybody has to realize is that even if when they open, they're not going to be full. A lot of people are going to be nervous to go. So I'm glad we're conservative, but I just want to understand when the restaurants being closed in May is going to hit us in revenue. So thank you, Karen.
Just a
That's
little.
I'm sorry, Peter had his hand up, so I just wanted to go back to Peter.
Yeah, I did, but I was physically raising my hand during board comment. I'd prefer you finish with public comment, and then maybe if we could come back.
Do we have more public comment? Okay, Peter, we're back to you.
All right. At some point, I need to go to an MMA training or something and get an education around encumbrance of funds, because I remain perplexed as to what we can and can't carry over. Which leads me to my questions around two public works projects. I've asked about both of them before, but the situation seems to continue to change. My principal concerns are the fuel tank project and the Pleasant Street project. And I'm curious as to what's going on with both, and are any funds, should any funds for either of those projects be of any concern? I know that we've received state aid money. I know that we've appropriated funds specifically for the fuel tanks, and I'm just worried that we may be bending the limits here.
I can answer.
Please.
So you're correct. We did receive the $165,000 from the state for the fuel tanks. So there's no deadline to spend that. Originally, that was the contract was June 30th, but those receipts are in the town's funds. And the other appropriation, supplemental appropriation for that were capital articles, and those carry over year to year. And when the project's complete, they're closed out. So those aren't considered encumbrances. They're just carry over versus closing out your appropriations from your operating budget at the end of the year.
Heather, if I could, just for clarification though, specific to that project, we appropriated a lot more money that we ended up needing because of the earmark money from the state, is my understanding. So by not completing that project this year, we're probably looking at FY22 free cash. Is that not correct?
No, well, there's a lot of variables. So depending on when they complete their permitting process with conservation is when we can go out to bid for the project. And when we have bids in and award it, we'll then know the more approximate cost of the project and would be able to turn back funds at that time. So assuming conservation, that whole process is done in the next couple of months or a few months, then I would assume by fall that we would be able to reappropriate what we don't need, or at least a portion of.
But wouldn't that money need to be certified?
No.
No, it doesn't. Okay.
Okay, I see a hand up, so I will.
I did have,
again-
if I could just, I had asked about Pleasant Street as well, and I'm curious as to what.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
The Pleasant
I don't know.
Street Bridge project.
Yes.
So that's a Mass DOT through the Small Bridge Program. That's a grant, that's a reimbursement type grant. So as far as I know, there's no impact to that funding mechanism through the state.
Okay, thank you.
And I think we're at 25% design phase. You have to go through the design phase with Mass DOT, our engineers do. So we're at that point.
Is that being encumbered by the COVID situation, or is that progressing?
To me, it seems like it had progressed naturally.
Okay. I've asked this, I mean, I've asked about this. This is probably the fourth or fifth time in the last year that I've asked about this project, and the original expectations that were set for this was that it would be buttoned up at the end of this fiscal year. So I'm going to continue to ask for obvious reasons because there's no shovel in the dirt yet. So
Yeah, the Pleasant Street project, that's really driven by Mass DOT and their review of the design. So that part is really out of our hands. Our engineers are working on that, our consultant, and have done the submittals. So, but it all, Mass DOT comes back with comments on that they have to do redesign or review on it. So.
thank you very much.
Welcome.
Okay, I'm going back to Phyllis or Carl Luck.
Thank you, Terry. Carl Luck, 50 Sunset Lane. I was going to be quiet for the rest of the session, but Mr. Beardmore pushed my button on the tanks. I'm sure he didn't intend that. But this is a problem. This is an opportunity. I think, contrary to what was passed at town meeting, there's the expectation that these tanks were going to be placed outside of conservation purview and outside of the Mulpus Brook riverfront. The plan that's been presented puts them back inside and in harm's way there. So that decision, in my personal opinion, educated by being a conservation commissioner and going through permitting very much like this at the gas station and at the Unitil, but my personal calculations say that decision is going to cost the town at least 2 months of delay in this project and between $20,000 and $40,000. That if they were moved outside to another area, which I believe is available, the town would save that time and that money. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dave?
Yeah, if I may, I was asked by a couple of residents, and I think Heather will have an answer for this question. If not, we'll defer and I'll make a phone call to Jack Rodequins. But a number of residents have driven by the DPW yard recently and seen some fairly substantial concrete conduit sections on the property that have arrived recently. The residents that asked me, I said, I don't know for sure, but I assume that's for the emergency repair for the driveway and the culvert for the Mulpus Brook. I'd just like to confirm that verbally through this meeting because I'm sure those residents will see it on YouTube.
I'm assuming as well. I haven't driven by and seen, those infrastructure pieces, but that I assume that's for the driveway entrance because there needed to be an emergency repair because it was collapsing.
Right. I saw that at conservation meeting the other night. Thank you.
Okay, there are no public comments waiting in the mail, and there are no more hands raised in the meeting. So unless there's something else that anybody has, I'll just, future meetings, Tuesday, again, 7 p.m. You should have the information for joining with the Board of Selectmen meeting for the legislative review of and review of school funding mechanisms. And Then Thursday night, we will be hearing from the school, from the sewer commission, and from the general administration. And we hopefully will know by then whether we will be needing to hear from the historical commission on the CPA. And Dave Blatt, I don't know if we'll be hearing from him then, or, I mean, we may just wait until the public hearing, which will then be the following week, which I'll ask at this point, for the purpose of the public hearing, do you want to continue to meet at 7, or do you want to back it up? Does anybody have a feeling about that? To a 6:30 start.
Do we anticipate
Nobody cares.
do we anticipate that the meeting will be long?
Well, I don't know how much we have to hear from planning. I know they're coming back with their warrant articles. It doesn't have to be. I think some of it will depend on whether or not we're hearing from the Historical Society on the Conservation Preservation Act or Community Preservation Act, and whether or not Dave Blatt will be speaking. He does talk fast, so we don't need that much time for that particular article. And I'm sorry, Dave, for picking on you, but I can't help it. Other than that, I don't think that there were, like more than on the budget.
Are we voting on recommendations for the warrant that night?
Yes.
And how-
Actually, when does the warrant report have to be in?
Let me look at my schedule.
I think it's the 14th.
Yeah, the selectmen are voting on the 12th. And
Okay, no, I was just asking, yeah, Michelle chimed in with the 14th, and she would know this because she's writing it, so.
So
but yeah,
we
on
have
the
to be
7th,
submitted on the 14th?
It has to be submitted on the 14th, so we'll have to make our recommendations on the 7th.
So we also have to go through the draft of the report as well.
Yes, I was just about to say, I'll have a draft written up a week before we take the vote, because I think I'll have a rough outline then. So I'll get the draft out and everybody can let me know what their feedback is, and it can get rewritten according to what everybody says.
I would recommend, Terry, based on all those things, that we go a little earlier, maybe 6:30.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if people disagree. The nice thing is it's light out at 6:30 now, but it could be a long night.
Dave?
Yeah, just one thing I thought of that I had asked Heather previously, and it may still not be an answer for this, but we're banking on having town meeting in the middle high school as our normal location. Now that schools are officially closed until the end of the school year, what mechanism is going to allow us to hold a meeting in that building? I know the Passios building is a town-controlled building, so there's different criteria there. So the election, I would assume, would be easier to have than entering the school buildings.
They'll probably let us in the schools, I would think.
we just worked with the superintendent and getting permission to use that space, and which we've already done.
And that's assuming
Yeah,
that
the kids can't see it, that's all.
right, and that's assuming that the May 4th order doesn't get continued to July 4th.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then with that, it's going to be a busy night on the 7th. Next week will be a busy night as well. And so with that, if somebody has a motion to adjourn so you can all rest up for that, that would be awesome.
So move.
Wait a second. All right, we have to vote by roll call. Peter?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Jay? Did Jay just fall off?
Yes.
Jay voted with his feet. Okay. No, I think he was having some problems.
I think he was.
It looked like he was having interference or something. So, And I for myself. So with that, good night, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Take care, everybody. Good night.
You too.